Kira had always been proud of her heritage, half human, half Valerian, with the distinctive silver-tipped ears and luminescent eyes that marked her alien ancestry. She lived in the borderlands, where cross-species households weren't uncommon, and she'd grown comfortable navigating both worlds. Perhaps too comfortable. When her partner Damien invited his colleague Adrian over for dinner, Kira didn't think much of it. Adrian was human, a cultural liaison who worked with hybrid families, and Damien thought it would be good for them to meet. "He's curious about our way of life," Damien had said that morning, his hand lingering on the small of her back. "Just be yourself." But being herself had become a problem lately. Kira had developed a sharp tongue, a habit of testing boundaries she knew she shouldn't cross. In human society, her behavior might pass as merely sarcastic or independent. But in Valerian culture, and in their household, respect was a sacred principle, especially toward guests. Adrian arrived precisely at 7, carrying wine and wearing an easy smile. He was tall, composed, with dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything without judgment. Kira greeted him coolly, already feeling a strange defensiveness rise in her chest. Throughout the meal, she found herself needling him with small comments. When he complimented the food, she laughed. "You haven't tasted real Valerian cuisine. This is just what we make for humans who can't handle complex flavors." Damien's jaw tightened, but Adrian only smiled slightly, taking another bite. When Adrian asked about Valerian bonding traditions, Kira rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, humans always find that fascinating. It's not as exotic as you probably think. Just a lot of rituals that don't translate well to your simpler customs." The room grew quiet. Damien's hand found hers under the table, squeezing in warning, but she pulled away. Adrian set down his fork carefully. He didn't look angry, just watchful. "I didn't mean to intrude on anything sacred," he said quietly. "I'm here to learn, not to judge." "Sure," Kira muttered, taking a long drink of wine. "Everyone says that." Later, as they moved to the living area, Kira sprawled on the couch, her posture deliberately casual, almost dismissive. She knew she was being rude. Some part of her even understood she was crossing a line. But another part, the stubborn, proud part, couldn't seem to stop. Damien excused himself to get dessert, leaving Kira and Adrian alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then Adrian spoke, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of something else, something that made Kira's ears flatten instinctively against her head. "In my work, I've learned that every culture has its own way of teaching respect," he said. "Some use words, some use actions, and some," he paused, meeting her eyes steadily, "some use consequences that are felt more than spoken." Kira felt a strange chill run down her spine, though she couldn't explain why. Kira tried to laugh off Adrian's words, but the sound came out hollow. She shifted on the couch, ready to deliver another cutting remark, when something strange happened. She couldn't sit back down. Not physically, her body was capable. But every time she tried to settle into the cushions, an inexplicable discomfort radiated through her, like an invisible hand pressing against her, keeping her upright. She adjusted her position, thinking perhaps she'd pulled a muscle, but the sensation persisted. "Something wrong?" Adrian asked, his expression neutral but his eyes knowing. "I'm fine," Kira said sharply, standing up instead. She paced to the window, her tail, usually so expressive, hanging still behind her. This was absurd. She was being ridiculous. Yet every attempt to sit felt like pushing against an invisible barrier. Damien returned with plates of dessert, immediately noticing her standing. "Babe, you okay?" "Yeah, just stretching," she managed, though her voice wavered slightly. The rest of the evening became torture. Every social cue suggested she should sit, should relax, should be a gracious host. But she remained standing, moving from spot to spot like a restless animal. Her legs began to ache. Her pride ached even more. Adrian and Damien talked easily, discussing cultural exchange programs and hybrid integration policies. Kira contributed occasionally, but her comments had lost their edge. She was too distracted by the growing realization that something fundamental had shifted, and she had caused it. When Adrian finally stood to leave, he thanked Damien warmly. Then he turned to Kira, and for the first time that evening, his expression softened slightly. In Valerian tradition, when someone disrespects a guest under their roof, they carry the weight of that disrespect until it's acknowledged, he said quietly. "I learned that in my studies. I didn't realize I'd experience it firsthand tonight." Kira's luminescent eyes widened. "How did you?" "I didn't do anything," Adrian said calmly. "You did this to yourself. The question is whether you're ready to put it down." After he left, Kira stood in the middle of their living room, trembling. Damien approached slowly, his expression a mixture of concern and disappointment. "You felt it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I don't understand," Kira whispered. "I haven't felt the weight since I was a child." Since you learned to respect the customs you were raised with," Damien finished. "But you've forgotten lately. You've been pushing, testing, seeing how far you can go." He cupped her face gently. "The weight doesn't come from outside, Kira. It comes from within. Your own conscience, your own heritage, holding you accountable." Tears pricked her eyes. "I can't even sit down, Damien. How long will this last?" "Until you make it right," he said simply. "Until you truly understand what you did wrong and choose to do better." That night, Kira stood by their bedroom window while Damien slept. Every attempt to lie down, to rest, met with that same inexorable resistance. Her body was her prison now, built by her own actions. Finally, as dawn broke, exhaustion forced her to her knees, the only position the weight would allow. And there, in that posture of humility, she began to understand. By morning, Kira was barely standing. Dark circles shadowed her luminescent eyes, and her legs trembled with fatigue. Damien had woken several times during the night to find her upright, pacing, trying desperately to find a position that didn't trigger that invisible force. "You need to make this right," he said over breakfast, which she ate standing at the counter. "Not for Adrian's sake, for yours." "How?" Kira's voice cracked. "I can't just call him and apologize. That's not how the weight works. I know that much." Damien nodded. "The weight doesn't lift for empty words. You have to demonstrate true understanding, true change. In our culture, that means a gesture of profound respect, something that costs you personally." Kira closed her eyes. She knew what he meant. In Valerian tradition, when someone had wronged a guest so severely that the weight manifested, the only path to redemption was through a ritual of vulnerability, exposing the part of yourself that had caused the harm and willingly accepting judgment. "I have to invite him back," she whispered. "Yes. And I have to submit to the unveiling." Damien's hand found hers. "Only if you choose to. You could carry the weight longer, wait for it to fade naturally. But that could take weeks. Months, maybe, given how deeply you've internalized your disrespect." The thought of spending weeks unable to sit, unable to rest, made Kira's stomach clench. But more than that, something deeper was shifting inside her. The sleepless night had given her time to think, to really examine her behavior. She'd been cruel to Adrian, not because he deserved it, but because she was afraid. Afraid that being vulnerable with outsiders meant losing something of herself. Afraid that respecting someone fully meant surrendering her power. But the weight had shown her the truth. Real strength came from choosing respect, not from withholding it. "Help me contact him," Kira said finally. "Today." Adrian arrived that evening, his expression carefully neutral. Kira stood in the center of their living room, her posture rigid not from the weight now, but from nervousness. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her fear. "I asked you here because I need to make something right." She explained the weight, how Valerian consciousness responded to severe breaches of respect, how she'd been trapped in her own guilt all night. Adrian listened without interrupting, his dark eyes focused entirely on her. "I was cruel to you because I was scared," Kira continued. "Scared that being truly open, truly respectful, would make me weak. But I was wrong. Disrespect is what made me weak. It disconnected me from my own values, from the person Damien fell in love with, from the culture I claimed to honor." She took a breath. "In Valerian tradition, I'm offering you the unveiling. I'll answer any question you have about our ways, our household, our life, with complete honesty. No deflection, no sarcasm, no protection for my ego. You'll see me as I truly am, and you'll judge whether my understanding is genuine." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I accept." For the next 2 hours, Adrian asked questions. Some were about Valerian culture, others about Kira specifically, her fears, her struggles with her dual heritage, her relationship with Damien. Each answer Kira gave stripped away another layer of her defenses. And slowly, gradually, she felt the weight begin to lift. The questions started simple, but grew increasingly personal. Adrian didn't ask to be cruel. His voice remained gentle throughout, but each inquiry peeled back another protective layer Kira had built around herself. "Why do you mock the traditions you claim to value?" Adrian asked. Kira swallowed hard. Damien sat nearby, present but silent, offering support through his steady presence. Because I never felt fully accepted by either world. Humans see my ears, my eyes, and treat me like I'm exotic. Valerians see my human blood and question my authenticity. So I learned to strike first, to mock before I could be mocked. And last night you were kind. You were genuinely interested. And that terrified me. Tears began to slip down Kira's cheeks. Because if you were sincere, then I'd been wrong. About humans, about respect, about how much of myself I've been hiding. Adrian leaned forward. Tell me about you and Damien. How did you meet? This question surprised her. At a cultural center. He was teaching a class on hybrid households. I went planning to argue with him, to prove that humans couldn't possibly understand Valerian bonding. She glanced at Damien, who smiled softly. Instead, he listened to everything I said, challenged me respectfully, and then asked me to coffee. What made you fall in love with him? He saw all of me, the sharp edges, the fear, the pride, and didn't try to sand me down. He just held space for me to be myself while also calling me forward to be better. Her voice broke, like he's doing now. Adrian nodded slowly. One more question, Kira. What do you need? The simplicity of it unraveled something in her chest. I need to stop being afraid of being seen. I need to trust that respect and vulnerability aren't weaknesses. They're the foundation of real connection. And I need to apologize to you properly. Not because of the weight, but because you deserve better from me. I accept your apology, Adrian said quietly. And I appreciate your honesty tonight. This couldn't have been easy. As he spoke, Kira felt it, the final release. The weight lifted completely, like a heavy coat being removed from her shoulders. She gasped, her knees buckling slightly, and suddenly she could move freely again. Without thinking, she sank to the floor, just feeling the relief of being able to sit, to rest, to finally let go. Damien was beside her immediately, pulling her into his arms. You did it, he murmured against her hair. I'm so proud of you. Adrian stood to leave, but Kira stopped him. Wait, please stay for a real meal. One where I'm actually a decent host. He smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I'd like that. Later, after Adrian had left and they'd cleaned up dinner, Damien led Kira to their bedroom. She moved slowly, still marveling at the simple freedom of sitting, lying down, existing without that constant pressure. How do you feel? Damien asked, brushing her silver-tipped hair from her face. Lighter, Kira admitted. And also heavier somehow. Like I'm carrying something real now, instead of just carrying fear. That's wisdom, Damien said softly. The weight taught you, and now you get to choose what to do with that lesson. She looked up at him, seeing the love and pride in his eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was awful. You weren't awful. You were scared and protecting yourself the only way you knew how. He kissed her forehead. But I'm glad you found a better way. The weeks following the unveiling brought subtle, but profound changes to Kira's life. She moved through the world differently now, more grounded, less defensive. The experience of carrying the weight, and more importantly, the act of releasing it through genuine vulnerability, had fundamentally altered how she saw herself. Adrian became an unexpected friend. He visited regularly, and Kira found herself looking forward to their conversations. Without the armor of sarcasm and deflection, she discovered he was funny, thoughtful, and genuinely fascinated by the complexity of hybrid culture, not as an outsider studying curiosities, but as someone who respected the depth of different ways of living. You're different with him now, Damien observed one evening after Adrian had left. Kira smiled, curling into Damien's side on the couch, a simple pleasure she no longer took for granted. I'm different with everyone now. The weight showed me something important. Respect isn't about making myself smaller. It's about making space for others to be fully themselves too. Damien's hand traced patterns along her arm, his touch familiar and grounding. I've watched you grow so much. Not just since the weight, but over the time we've been together. You let me see you that first night we met, really see you, and you're still teaching me new things about courage every day. She turned to face him fully, her luminescent eyes bright in the dim light. I was thinking about that night. How I came to your class ready to fight, and you just received me. No judgment, no attempt to fix me. You made respect feel like an invitation instead of a demand. That's because it is, Damien said softly. Genuine respect can't be demanded. It has to be offered freely. The weight doesn't force respect. It just makes the cost of disrespect visible. Kira considered this, her ears twitching thoughtfully. I think I needed that visibility. I'd gotten so good at hiding the cost, even from myself. Every sharp comment, every dismissive gesture, I told myself I was just being independent, protecting my boundaries. I couldn't see how much I was actually protecting myself from real connection. Damien pulled her closer, his warmth enveloping her. And now I understand that boundaries and walls are different things. I can have strong boundaries while still being open, still being respectful, still being vulnerable when it matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply being present with each other. This too was something Kira had learned, that intimacy wasn't always about intensity or passion. Sometimes it was just this, quiet presence, mutual respect, the safety of being fully known. I've been thinking, Kira said eventually, about sharing our story. There are other hybrids who struggle like I did, caught between worlds, using defense mechanisms that hurt themselves and others. Maybe our experience could help someone. Damien smiled, pride evident in his expression. I think that's a beautiful idea. What changed your mind? You've always been so private. The unveiling taught me something unexpected. I thought vulnerability would make me weaker, easier to hurt. But instead, she paused, searching for the right words. Instead, it made me stronger, more solid, like I'm standing on actual ground now, instead of constantly defending shaky territory. That's the difference between shame and authenticity, Damien observed. Shame makes us hide. Authenticity makes us strong enough to be seen. A month later, Kira stood in front of a small gathering at the cultural center where she'd first met Damien. Adrian sat in the front row, offering an encouraging smile. Damien stood at the side, his presence a steady anchor. I want to tell you about the weight, Kira began, her voice clear and strong. About what happens when we violate our own deepest values, and about the path back to wholeness. She shared her story, the disrespect, the consequences, the sleepless night, and the unveiling. She spoke about fear and pride, about the difference between protection and disconnection, about learning that true strength came from vulnerability, not from armor. The weight didn't punish me, she concluded. It held space for me to find my way back to who I really am. It reminded me that my heritage, both Valerian and human, isn't about choosing one world over another. It's about honoring the full truth of both, and letting that truth guide how I show up in every relationship. After her talk, several people approached her with their own stories. A young hybrid man who'd been struggling with similar defensive patterns. A human woman in a relationship with a Valerian partner, trying to understand the cultural nuances. An elder Valerian who simply nodded in recognition, understanding the journey Kira had traveled. That night, back in their home, Damien found Kira sitting quietly on their balcony, looking up at the stars. Tired? He asked, joining her. Exhilarated, she corrected. And grateful. For you, for the wait, even for Adrian being patient enough to help me learn. Damien wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You did the work, Kira. All of us just held space for you. She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. I keep thinking about how close I came to losing this. To losing you, losing myself, all because I was too proud to be honest about my fears. But you didn't lose it, Damien reminded her gently. You chose differently. That's what matters. Kira turned to face him fully, her hands finding his. Make love to me, she whispered. Not because I'm trying to escape or forget anything, but because I want to celebrate. I want to feel this, us, with all the barriers down, all the defenses released. Damien's eyes darkened with desire and something deeper, reverence for who she'd become, pride in their journey together. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. They moved inside slowly, savoring each moment. There was no rush, no desperation. Just presence and intention, and profound respect for the gift of being fully known and fully loved. As Damien's hands traced the curve of her spine, as her luminescent eyes met his in the darkness, Kira understood. This was the real freedom. Not the lifting of the weight, but the willingness to be vulnerable enough to love and be loved without reservation. Thank you, she breathed against his skin. For what? For believing I could be better. For loving me through the journey of becoming her. Damien smiled, kissing her deeply. Always, Kira. Always. And in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, she finally felt completely at home. Not in human culture or Valerian tradition, but in the space they'd created together, built on respect, honesty, and love that saw clearly and chose fully. The weight had been heavy, yes. But the lesson it taught her, about honor, about vulnerability, about the strength that comes from truly seeing and being seen, was worth every moment of discomfort. She would carry that lesson forward, not as a burden, but as a gift. A reminder that respect begins with respecting yourself enough to be honest, to be open, and to trust that genuine connection is worth the risk. The end.